President Trump is about to head into a meeting with Venezuela's opposition leader, feeling emboldened after Senate Republicans blocked an effort to limit his war powers. His role now in determining the future of the country's post-Nicolas Maduro has brought Maria Corina Machado to the White House after Trump surprised many by sidelining her in favor of Maduro's vice president. But Machado comes bearing gifts and to share her Nobel Peace Prize, though the Nobel Institute has made it clear this is not transferable. President Trump tells Reuters, quote, "I think we're just going to talk. I think we're just going to talk basics." MS Now's Vaughn Hilliard reports from the White House. Ali Vitale reports from Capitol Hill. Also here with us, the President Emeritus at the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass. So, Richard, just the other day, the president posted this fake image of a Wikipedia page calling himself the acting president of Venezuela. So is there anything basic about these talks?
Well, the president isn't the acting president of Venezuela, in part because the United States has not done regime change. We've obviously not done an occupation. We're obviously not doing nation building. What we've done is very limited leadership change. So the real question for these talks is beyond that, beyond the desire to get the United States oil companies into the oil sector of Venezuela. What is the United States prepared to do when it comes to reforming Venezuelan politics? Is there a role for what ought to have been the legitimately elected opposition just over a year ago? And where might the United States use its leverage on the current successor government there to open up a political space for Mrs. Machado and others? I think that's the only real question.
So, Vaughn, after the raid, Trump said Machado was a nice woman but lacked respect in Venezuela. Is there a sense she could do or say anything that would change Trump's mind today?
In question whether she could effectively lead the country. It's truly remarkable, especially understanding that over the course of the last 2 weeks, for instance, on Fox, Sean Hannity asked her whether she'd be willing to share her Nobel Peace Prize with Donald Trump, the American president. And she sort of hesitantly suggested that she would be open to sharing it. This is a moment here where the president has repeatedly suggested he is the one that is worthy of the Nobel Peace Prize because he has ended so many wars. And then yet, after taking out Nicolas Maduro, the opposition leader, who was effectively the one in waiting, he undercut her and said that she didn't have the respect of her own country and instead turned to Maduro's vice president, somebody who Machado has said very explicitly should not be trusted. It was the architect of the repressive regime's tactics across Venezuela. And that is why, just ahead of her visit here, we expect to see her at the White House in a matter of minutes. It was notable that the president, when asked about her visit, and then Delcy Rodriguez, who was essentially the one in interim power in Venezuela, well, this was his response.
We just had a great conversation today, and she's a terrific person. I mean, she's somebody that we've worked with very well. Marco Rubio is dealing with her. I dealt with her this morning. We had a long call. We discussed a lot of things, and I think we're getting along very well with Venezuela.
A terrific person. Again, that was the president just yesterday talking about Delcy Rodriguez, who was Nicolas Maduro's vice president, somebody that Machado has said is potentially even worse than Nicolas Maduro. And so the conversation inside of the White House here today, you could expect to be understandably tense, understanding that the opposition leader just heard directly from the president suggest that he is perfectly okay with Maduro's right hand staying in power.
So, Ellie, Florida Republicans are sending a message to Trump about who they think is best to lead Venezuela, and it's Machado. Yeah. What's the thinking there?
Well, think about that this group of lawmakers, Chris, has been dialed in on the issue of Venezuela for far longer than most of the members up here who have always kept an eye on it, but it's never been central. But in Florida politics, because the state boasts the largest Venezuelan population in the U.S., this has always been a key focus. And so for some of these Florida lawmakers, they themselves have a long relationship with Maria Corina Machado. They have been among the loudest voices praising the Trump administration for ousting Maduro in the first place. And it's why I noticed the way that they were talking with such clarity about what needed to happen next during this small d democratic transition in the country, and their clarity around Machado when the White House itself was muddying the waters and seemingly giving Delcy Rodriguez, if not an upper hand, at least a clear shot at being a person who could continue to run the country. It's why the stakes around this Machado meeting are so high, and it's also why it's notable that those members here on Capitol Hill that I've spoken to are really keen to give the administration some time and some space, even after Trump himself cast some doubt on whether Machado had the respect of those in the country to lead it. It's that exact sentiment that we asked Senator Rick Scott, Florida senator, about. Listen to what he said. His response is instructive. Watch.
Well, I don't think there's any question she has to respect. If she'd been on the ballot, she would have gotten 90% of the vote last time. She proved that Edmundo Gonzalez won, so she has to respect. But President Trump's got a plan of how to transition where we don't have civil unrest, and so I hope that it works.
And so I want to be clear, Chris, I don't think that this is an outright rift among a key group of Republicans with the White House, at least not yet. But I do think it's important to show the way that the administration has, again, not been clear at all about the role that Machado should play next, while Republicans from the Florida delegation here on Capitol Hill have been more than clear and effusive in their praise. I think there's also one point that we should make here, which is that when you talk about the Florida delegation and the focus they've had on Venezuela, Marco Rubio was for a long time a part of that and a leading voice within it. It's why he's been able to take such a clear role in Venezuela and foreign policy in this Trump administration. But it's also notable the ways that he himself has pulled back on overtly praising Machado, who he also has a relationship with from his time in the Florida delegation. Even just a few months ago, before he was tapped as Secretary of State, he was part of a letter that Florida Republicans and Democrats signed saying that that Machado should get that Nobel Peace Prize that has now become one of the centerpieces to her charm offensive with President Trump. And so all of this kind of comes to an administration that is pretty Florida-centric and an issue that has always been a centerpiece of that state's politics.
Yeah, Richard, we'll see if she brings the 18-karat gold Nobel Peace Prize to give or share, I don't know, with Trump today. But I want to play a reminder of what she told Fox about that.
Did you at any point offer to give him the Nobel Peace Prize? Did that actually happen? I had read that somewhere. I wasn't sure if it was true.
Well, it hasn't happened yet, but I certainly would love to be able to personally tell him that we believe the Venezuelan people, because this is a prize of the Venezuelan people, certainly want to give it to him and share it with him. What he has done, as I said, is historic. It's a huge step towards a democratic transition.
So the New York Times is reporting that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee is taking heat at home because Norwegians say this soft power tool has become a part of a political game. Does this matter? Or Richard, is it more of a sideshow?
It's a sideshow. Sometimes sideshows can matter with this White House. The president is obviously somewhat obsessed with the Peace Prize, but it's not the real issue. Look, there's a balance here. You couldn't bring Mrs. Machado into power right away without probably triggering massive civil unrest. On the other hand, you don't want to throw her under the bus, as has largely happened until now. So the serious issue is, can you begin to put into motion a political process where you begin to broaden participation in Venezuela so it's not simply the old regime minus Maduro? And that's the serious issue. And if doing something, if sharing or taking pictures with the Peace Prize gets the president in that frame of mind where he accepts that there's some kind of a meaningful role for the opposition, then go ahead and share it or do what you have to. But the real issue is the political trajectory of Venezuela and whether this country becomes essentially a viable, real country with real political participation, which provides, by the way, the stability then in the long run you'll need in order to revive the oil sector and revive economic growth.
But if Rick Scott's hope is correct and putting the vice president or having the vice president in as the acting president is a transition that allows for there not to be civil unrest, then what, though? If she is, again, as some people have suggested, worse than the person she replaced, is she going to leave? Are there going to be free and fair elections? Like, what happens?
Well, you could have elections for something less than the leader of the country. You could set a political process. And again, you want to do this in stages. You don't want to put this at a pace that will overwhelm the political circuits. The last thing we want to see, again, is some kind of a civil war where all these collectivos see her and the opposition as a threat. You don't want to try to do this overnight, but you don't want to leave things where they are. And that's the challenge. And I think this is doable, but we've got to avoid the two extremes of going too fast and not going anywhere.
Richard Haass, Vaughn Hilliard, Ali Vitale, thank you all.